That's a big box. So I've got something very special from Velocity Micro. Performance starts here. Yes, indeed. Full disclosure, they sent it over. But the reason they sent it over is because I said, I want to do this. This is one of the few Workstation class machines from an integrator, a large system integrator like Velocity Micro, that features the ASRock WRX80 Workstation motherboard. I've been using that motherboard for, well, since the day it came out, and I've been very happy with it, very impressed with it. So it's like, okay, let's see how Velocity Micro puts a workstation together based around the Threadripper platform. Enter this thing. Let's get it unboxed. Yeah! Thank you for choosing Velocity Micro. It's a bag of holding. My favorite kind of bag. Now, just full disclosure on this review, I gotta send this back just as soon as the review is done, and no money changed hands or anything like that. So this is just blind me. I got this in a box. I want to sort of test it, take a look at it. This is one of the few systems I could find in retail that actually has ASRock's workstation motherboard, etc., etc. But I do have a coupon code for you, Level 1 Text. You can get 5% off your next order from Velocity Micro. 5% off. Yeah, even if you aren't going to build a Threadripper system, maybe you want a gaming PC, maybe you want to order something else, 5% off. Use my coupon code. Click the link below. Well, that's a pretty clever box design. It's foam, but with air padding around the outside because they know what shippers are going to do. The oddie, naughty things that shippers will do to this kind of a system. Well, I can already tell the case is aluminium. Also in the box, oh, we got a Velocity Micro shirt. XL. Somebody's been watching the Level 1 Text videos. I've been pumping iron a little bit. Oh, this is cool. So in addition to your power cord, you also get your extra unused power supply cables from your modular stuff. Wireless antenna, which is removable. A Windows key. A support business card. Read this first. And a signature that says that this has been lovingly hand-built to the highest standards from this system technician and this production manager. Thank you, system integrator, system technician person, and also production manager for making sure that the system technician is not asleep at the helm. We shall see. And that appears to be it for the box. Don't want to box myself in, so I need to deal with this. Now be careful when you're unpacking the system because the rear connections are not recessed. If you lay it on the back, you're going to mess up your motherboard connectors. It's got nice hard rubber feet. It's not going to scratch up your desk. It has a very attractive brushed aluminum finish, and it's very, very lightweight. Shockingly lightweight. Oh yeah, all the warnings and stuff on the side are, you can't just plug it in and start using it. Because of the foam. Fortunately, you can get at that toollessly, and that is real glass in the side. Oh my gosh, I need to put gloves on. I'm getting my fingerprints everywhere. That's pretty cool. Pretty fun little piece of glass there. Let's get our system hooked up. Would you say that Velocity Micro rises to the occasion? Now, as configured, this is the 32-core Threadripper system with 64 gigabytes of memory. About 2 gigabytes per core is about what you go for. 64 gigabytes, of course, you can use 8 memory channels because this is Threadripper Pro, and it's equipped with Velocity Micro's 360mm radiator. With the system turned off, our kilowatt is reading about 20 watts. 20 watts standby for Threadripper, I believe it. Nothing wrong with that. I've just gotten it unboxed, and I'm noticing that the fans on this side are not spinning. This is configured as an intake, but I have not taken the side off this side yet. I just took the side off this side so that I could take the foam away. But the fans are not spinning. Alrighty then. Why are we not spinning? You know, even though these fans weren't working or aren't working, the other fans are pulling air through that vent pretty well. Maybe something on this side? I mean, it seems to me that the header is connected. That one right there. That one. I mean, it seems like it's working. Erwin, fetch the long fan extension. Ah, yes. Excellent. I unplugged it from the motherboard, as you probably saw. Moved a little bit. Ow, that's my fingers. Okay. Ooh, that's a lot of heat coming off there. My goodness. Probably getting that in the OBS too. Like a little space heater. Okay. So, fans are fine, header's not working. BIOS sabotage. BIOS. Somebody sabotaged the BIOS. Now, in case you're not in the know about Threadripper Pro motherboards, there is a VGA connection at the back here, and there's an extra network card or network port that's off by itself. This is for remote out-of-band management. Threadripper Pro is in a weird spot between workstations and the highest-end workstations and servers. It is a high-end workstation, an extremely high-end workstation, and because it is a high-end workstation platform, it has remote, fully remote management built into the motherboard, just like a server does. And so you can use the onboard VGA and the separate network port to have a fully out-of-band managed system. Sometimes people rack mount these or store them somewhere else, and the out-of-band management is useful for IT folks for managing, you know, the system from remote. There's of course two built-in 10 gig ports on this. There's actually a V1 and a V2 version of this WRX motherboard from ASRock, and really the only change is the vendor for the 10 gigabit Ethernet chipset. But in both cases, dual 10 gigabit right on board. This is also one of the very, very few, I think the only WRX80 motherboard that has Thunderbolt. It has two Thunderbolt 40 gigabit ports. Right below that, you've got two mini DisplayPort in. The way this works is you're supposed to have a little DisplayPort to mini DisplayPort cable that goes out of your GPU, in our case an RTX 4080, back into the motherboard, and then you've got your Thunderbolt connection, which supports Thunderbolt mode as well as DisplayPort alt mode. So if you've got a Thunderbolt display, one of the fancy 5K displays, you can plug that into a Thunderbolt port and it will work fine on this platform. That's what I use for KVM testing. Another nice feature of this motherboard, you should really check out my review of this motherboard, is that it's got the 7.1 audio with optical SPDIF. Now, the one that I reviewed is V1, the one that's in this system is V2. The only real difference is this has the Marvell fast action dual 10 gigabit, and the V1 has the Intel chipset. But the Intel chipset's been a little hard to get a hold of in these uncertain times, and this chipset tested just fine. We're able to fully saturate 10 gigabit link. Heck, you can plug in both 10 gigabit connections and get 20 gigabit SMB multi-channel. Works perfectly, as long as your network is set up to do that. But yeah, and then you've got a plurality of PCI Express Gen 4 expansion slots on this motherboard, along with auxiliary power inputs and that kind of stuff. As equipped with this system, it's got an RTX 4080 from PNY. That'll be perfect for CUDA, machine learning, anything else you want to do if you didn't want to shell out the extra bucks for something like a Quadro, because NVIDIA really wants you to buy Quadros. And PNY makes great Quadros, as it turns out. Now, in terms of fit and finish and assembly, I've got no complaints. It's a brushed aluminum case, it's very thin, it's going to be unforgiving of any noise that the system emits, and yet the system is very, very quiet for this kind of a design. They don't have any sound dampening material or anything. It's surprisingly lightweight. It's a very simple case design, but, you know, that's an aesthetic. It's simple, it's understated, It's nice. The side panel on the back side has 2 screws that hold it in place. I had to take that off to troubleshoot the fan issue. And then on the other side, the glass panel adds the most weight. That's probably the heaviest panel on the system. The front is non-removable, the top, the bottom, there's no other removable components really in this case, except for the tray where you can put 2.5-inch drives. I'll talk about that in a second. In terms of the airflow design and the airflow aesthetic for this, it draws air in from the vertical vent on the side here. There's no built-in dust filter, but the small holes of this mesh mean that it's going to accumulate dust, and you can just, wipe your system off and clean the dust off that way. It goes through the 360mm Acetec. It's basically an Acetec or an Acetec looking. I don't know, the patents have expired now, so that's not necessarily a given. But it's an Acetec style, let's call it, if it's not Acetec. 360mm radiator that comes through the front. And so all of that warm air from your processor is going to enter the main cabin of your system. There is a vent at the bottom, all along the bottom, on the other side of the computer. But the power supply is vented separately, so it has its own compartment basically. Now it's not sealed around there. A little bit of air can go around the compartment for the power supply. You can have a little bit of air mixing, but it is possible for the power supply to draw fresh air in from the outside as well as from the back and exhaust it out the bottom. Depending on how your power supply is designed, it's usually going to draw air in from the bottom and exhaust it out the back. It doesn't really need the compartment part of it. Underneath the 2 3.5-inch drive bays at the front, there is a spot where you could put a slim fan. There's not one here, but that's also a vent. So effectively, whatever you've got for the exhaust on this thing, it's going to try to pull air in from the sides, the bottom, and then the 360mm radiator here is going to force a lot of air in with those fans. These 2 fans at the top are configured as exhaust as well as the one at the rear, and they are connected to a breakout header which then connects to the CPU header on the motherboard. So when your system needs more CPU cooling, as we're starting to need to, the fans are starting to ramp a little bit, you may have been able to hear that, it'll exhaust more air from the system. In the default configuration, it doesn't seem like the header that the fans for the radiator are connected to is tied to CPU temperature. That may be a limitation of the WRX80 motherboard. I think one of the other things ASRock missed on that motherboard was having an external temperature input. That would be super handy because you could monitor the temperature of the system or a custom loop or whatever kind of high-end system that people are building in order to do that. I get why ASRock didn't do that. It's not something that you run into in servers. Servers actually use a digital management bus for that, and this motherboard has those headers. It's only people down here in pleb tier land that are using raw analog sensors, and so they didn't add any analog sensors to this motherboard. I get why, because why are you doing that? This is designed to be a workstation. It's got built-in remote management, IPMI, and its own dedicated management adapter. What are you doing adding analog sensors? But still, it's a nice quality of life improvement. Oh, and we also get comments from the same 37 people every time. What about the PCH fan that's on the motherboard? It didn't come on during any of the testing at all. Like it didn't ramp up, so you can't hear it if it doesn't run. The spoiler alert is that if you don't have a lot of stuff traveling through the chipset's not going to get hot. It's not going to do a lot, especially on later versions of BIOSes and stuff like that from the motherboard. So there's some M.2 connectivity provided through the chipset. The LAN connection is provided through the chipset, which 10 gigabit is only a gigabyte per second. That's not that fast in the grand scheme of things when we're talking about chipset interfaces. And so it doesn't really get warm. It might come on under more extreme scenarios, but the PCIe slots are wired in through the CPU. You don't really have to worry about that either. So even if you've loaded this thing down with a ton of peripherals, the PCH fan doesn't really have to spin unless you've really got the system fully loaded down. And if you are going to run multi-GPU, I like that they've connected the power to the auxiliary power input on the motherboard, so you can run dual GPUs with this. You could run dual RTX 6000s and turn this into your machine learning monster system or whatever it is that you want to run. Totally a thing. I mean, 32-core Threadripper is still monstrous. This is the fastest 32-core CPU that you can get for workstation stuff. I mean, that's pretty good considering that this is not DDR5 and this platform has been out for more than a year. For the top I/O, we've got a lighted Velocity Micro blue button, 2 USB Type A ports, those are 5 gigabit, and 1 Type C, which goes going directly into our WRX80 Type C header on the motherboard. We've also got separate headphone and microphone ports right on the top. If you have a cat, the cat is definitely going to hit the power button in that location, but that's okay. The memory bundled with this system is Kingston, based on Micron chips. That's going to vary depending on what system you get, probably. But it's 4 DIMMs, it's not 8 DIMMs. I would definitely recommend that you go with an 8 DIMM memory configuration for the 32 and 64 core Threadripper Pro. You don't really need to. I mean, actually Threadripper Pro does fine with 4 and even 6 memory channels out of 8. And this does give you a nice upgrade path. You can always add more memory later. But if it's got 8 channels and you want it to go fast, give it 8 channels. It's also configured DDR4 3200, which is the most stable supported configuration. You can run DDR4 3600 with this. I mean, ASRock's got the only WRX80 motherboard that is actually overclockable. I wouldn't recommend that you overclock, though. I mean, this is a workstation. You're trying to get stuff done. You know, if you're going to do that, you might as well put your own system together and go through the headache and blah, blah, blah. This is an AIO. This is designed for a very, very long service lifetime. Velocity Micro by default will warranty these for a year, but 3-year warranties are an option. You just pay a little bit more for that. And this does seem like a system that is built to be maintenance free for 3+ years, which is nice and welcome. Now, in terms of pricing and configuration, I mean, this is a workstation, and Velocity Micro is known for building workstations. You would have to compare the price to something like a Lenovo workstation based around similar processor. And the pricing is pretty similar, although the Lenovo is a little bit more expensive. The Lenovo also has registered error correcting memory, whereas the memory here is not registered error correcting memory, it's just straight DDR4 3200, but it's also a little less expensive, so not bad. It's also not possible to configure the Lenovo with a gaming GPU, so that's another difference, but this is a better motherboard, a better platform, standard power supply, standard ATX case. As configured, the Velocity Micro price for this system was just shy of $10,000 US, at least at the time that I'm doing this video. All in all, it's no secret that I like the Threadripper Pro platform for workstations. When Threadripper showed up, it certainly disrupted things, and that's not something that I will soon forget. 32 cores is still, in 2023, even though this is relatively late in the life cycle, it's still hugely powerful. There's a reason that the system integrators are even still selling 3000 series Threadripper Pro CPUs, because you can get a lot of work done with them depending on what your work is. For a developer workstation, for rendering, for anything where you can actually take advantage of 32 cores, these machines, they've got the goods. For our benchmark results, everything is right where it should be. We're getting about 65 gigabytes per second as reported by Ada64 with a memory latency of roughly 80 nanoseconds, give or take. DDR4 3200, it is a command rate of 1. The primary timings are pretty good, but this is configured for workstation use, and it's Threadripper Pro, so still, that's faster than you would get with registered DDR4, and this is a pretty good setup in this platform with 428 gig DIMMs. You can definitely clear 100 gigabytes per second with 8 DIMMs, so if memory bandwidth is important for what you're doing, configure your system with 8 DIMMs. Our Geekbench 6 scores well over 2,000 points for single thread, and just over 15,000 points for multi-thread. Again, it's a pretty dominating Threadripper Pro system. What do you do when you got 32 cores? You just compute the problem away. That's what you do. For gaming, well, as you might imagine, gaming performance is definitely top-notch. I mean, the RTX 4080 is going to perform like an RTX 4080. Over 100 FPS in most titles, DLSS 3 will definitely get you over 100 FPS if you're not already there, even if you're playing up to 4K. It might be nice to have more VRAM on the 4080. I mean, pretty much everybody says that. That's kind of a given. If you were doing a little bit of workstation and a little bit of machine learning and also a little bit of game playing, but you weren't doing enough machine learning work to justify the cost of an RTX 6000, it probably would be worth the upgrade to the RTX 4090 just for the extra VRAM. And hey, games will benefit too. Of course, AMD has also made great strides with ROCm lately. ROCm 5.6 just came out, and they were making waves. Now, ROCm is still not really fully supported for gaming GPUs. You need CDNA, not RDNA, and that's a source of a lot of consternation and confusion. But AMD is getting there in terms of better support for ROCm on RDNA GPUs. We're not quite there yet, but CDNA will melt your brain. It's really awesome, but CDNA in a workstation, it's going to be a little bit more specialty. In terms of power usage and power utilization, if I'm doing CPU-bound benchmarks, it's pretty much under 500 watts all the time, and that's at the wall. 425, 450 watts is more normal with a fully pegged CPU, and that's without PBO enabled or anything like that. The system uses about 20 watts when it's turned off, so the standby power to keep the remote management card turned on and powered and everything else going with that, that's about 20 watts, give or take. Of course, that's no problem for our Be Quiet power supply. It's going to be a pretty even split between the GPU and the CPU and the motherboard and everything else that goes with that, because the RTX 4080, especially if you have a high refresh rate monitor, it will tend to be kind of weird in terms of its standby power utilization. If you're just running a low resolution 60 Hz monitor, it seems like it's like 9 watts, but it'll use more than that. But it'll use more than that if you're running like 4K 144. The keen-eyed among you may have already noticed that the memory configuration on the motherboard is contrary to what ASRock has in the manual for the motherboard, or is contrary to the documentation recommendation from AMD when you're running 4 DIMMs. You can run 1 DIMM or 2 DIMMs, definitely not recommended. I mean, it'll light the platform, but you don't want to do that, it's dumb. And you can run 4 DIMMs, and you can run 8 DIMMs. 6 DIMMs is also an option, although I think the ASRock manual, at least the version of the manual that I'm remembering from my 1.0 board, didn't bother telling you what the 6 DIMM configuration was. 6 DIMMs doesn't work super great on the 3000 series processors, but it does work a lot better on the 5000 series Threadripper Pro processors. But the weird thing is that it's not symmetrical, at least not the recommended configurations. The 2 nearer slots on the top and the 2 farther slots on the bottom, at least according to the manual. What that means as a practical matter is, depending on the job and depending on how the job is spread around the processor, different jobs will run with different performance characteristics depending on the physical location of the memory. So in this configuration, gaming type workloads actually would be slightly better. Workstation workloads would be slightly worse, because the workstation performance you want to be as good as possible across all of your CPUs. Some of your CPUs will be faster than others with this memory configuration for memory-bound jobs. It's sort of weird, that. And you can kind of see that from the Ada64 benchmarks. I mean, overall, it's like, wait a minute, what's going on with the latency and the memory throughput? Well, that's what it is. Velocity Micro ships it in a configuration that's not referenced in the manual, but it's not necessarily wrong. It just depends on what job you're targeting. But I did ask them about it. It's like, was that intentional or was that just reflexive? So as you can see with our Ada64 memory benchmark, just moving the memory, still XMP profile, still same timings, still same clock speed, still same CPU speed, nothing else has changed. But we've improved our memory bandwidth and lowered our latency by about 10 nanoseconds. So for gaming type workloads, having the AMD recommended memory configuration is going to benefit you. The other memory configuration may be useful in certain very heavy multi-thread scenarios, but mostly this configuration, which is technically asymmetrical, is the one that you want. So you can see CPU Z, even after I move the memory, it's roughly the same score. Just the one thread, not going to make a difference. It's because that one thread was always running on the top bank of memory. Whereas things that are a little bit more multi-thread can benefit from this other memory configuration. I know I don't recommend it, but if you're going to do it anyway, in terms of overclocking, and you want to download Ryzen Master, you haven't tried it in a while, you really should check out the Curve Optimizer thing. The Curve Optimizer thing is legit bananas awesome, and it will unlock the potential, the full potential of your machine, whether you're a Ryzen desktop or Threadripper Pro in this case. It takes about 3 hours to run, because it's doing a lot of stability tests to make sure that everything basically works the way that it's supposed to, even with the overclock. It is an overclock. You can always turn it off later. There's very little danger that you're going to wreck anything with this. But if you do this, it's just free performance, because why wouldn't you do this? It's free performance. Did you hear me? I said free performance.
Sunday, Curve Optimizer coming to a Ryzen processor near you.
And if you like what you see, don't forget about that coupon code below, 5% off. Coupon code level 1 text. Be sure to use that. You should go play with the checkout thing, even if you're not going to check out, just so that you could play with the checkout thing and be like, I'm thinking about a system like this. Because this is a nice workstation. And especially when you price it against what Dell, HP, and Lenovo are offering in the same sort of workstation class. This is a pro CPU, after all. Thanks Velocity Micro for sending this over. We're going to use this for one more Linux video. We're going to do VFIO pass-throughs, the ultimate system. Going to swap around the GPUs and do some more Linux testing to get that accomplished because, hey, Linux. Be sure to check that out on the Level 1 Linux channel. I'm signing out, and you can find me over there.